Hello BookTube, hello friends, welcome to LizziefayeLovesBooks. I'm Elizabeth, and in this video I'd like to do a wrap-up of all of the readathons that I participated in during the fall of 2020. I did several month-long readathons, at least one in September, two in October, and one in November, and then I participated in the Fall Into Reading Challenge, which took place over that whole entire 3-month period from September through the end of November. And even though I've done several Friday Reads videos and I've done monthly wrap-ups and things like that where I've talked about each of these books, I didn't really do a comprehensive overview of what books counted specifically for each challenge. And I have several of my November library books that need to go back, and several that I'm going to just insert pictures of and show you. But I thought before I take all of these library books back, I may as well go ahead and get this done. Now, I had wanted to wait until I got every single book read that I needed to count for some of these challenges, and I got most of them done, but I still have 2 or 3 that really, before I will personally consider that challenge completely done, I want to get those books done, and I plan to get at least 2 of them done before the end of this month of December and before the end of this year. But if I don't, it's fine. I still consider all of these readathons a win. I have read a lot of really good books, a few that I didn't particularly love, but I'm really happy with all of my reading progress that I got accomplished for the fall season. So let's go back and start with the month of September. Now, I should tell you that I started out the month of September finishing or trying to finish the books that I had wanted to read for the Summer Fling Readathon, which took place over the entire month of August. And that was basically a romance readathon created by Sarah from, at the time, Steeped in Books. Now she's the Bookish Knitter. And it was co-hosted by several other romance reading booktubers, including myself. And I have finished all of the books that I set out to read for the Summer Fling, except one. And I must get that book read by the end of this month, but at this point it's early December and I have started it, but I have not gotten very far in it. So we're not going to talk about that, but let's move on into September. The month-long readathon that I participated in for September was the Get Your Shelf Together readathon. It was created and hosted by the channel is An Average Girl's Guide to a Full Life, and I believe her name is Alexandra. And her challenges basically were to read books that were from your own shelves, and she had some different prompts to go by, and I still have not finished one of those prompts. So the first prompt was to finish a series, and I did finish a trilogy by Rick Riordan. It's the Kane Chronicles, and this third book is The Serpent's Shadow. The second prompt was to read a cover by, or a book that you bought for the cover. And I started out saying that I was going to read the 2 books that I own from this series, which I also drew out of my TBR jar. This is a series by Terry Thayer. They are quilting mysteries. This is the second book, which I bought first, very much because of the cover and because it's about quilting, and it's called Old Maid's Puzzle. I have since purchased the first book and I do plan to read them, but I did not get them done yet. So what I'm going to count for that prompt is another book that I bought for the cover. This is by Debbie Macomber, and I'm actually counting this for another readathon for October, but still I did buy this for the cover. I love apples. It's got this wheelbarrow full of apples on the cover. This is a 2-book bind up by Debbie Macomber called Orchard Valley Grooms, and the 2 books were originally published individually back several years ago. The first one is called Valerie and the second one is called Stephanie, and then there is another 2-book bind up in this series called Orchard Valley Brides, and I listened to both of those as well. So definitely this counts because I specifically bought this for the cover. I do read a lot of Debbie Macomber, but I don't always buy them. I don't necessarily collect Debbie Makenberg books, but I bought this one because I love those apples on the cover. And then the third prompt is to read your oldest book on your shelf. And that's pretty hard because I have some really old books. But I looked at my current TBR and I thought, okay, I've got a couple of choices. I've got a really old book that I haven't had that long, which is Over the Gate by Miss Reed. This is the next book in the Fair Acre series that I need to read. I have not read it yet, but I do plan to read it before the end of the year. And then I have a book that I've had since the 80s. It was written or originally published in, I think, 1945. And this is the book, this first book in this 3-book bind-up that I wanted to read for the summer fling for my old school romance. I still have not read it. I have not finished this prompt because of all the books that I currently have on my TBR that I want to read that I would consider, you know, oldest on my TBR. You know, those are the two, and I haven't finished either of them. So that prompt is not done, but if I get this one read, then this will finish up the summer fling and the Get Your Shelf Together. So it is definitely high priority for December. Then the next prompt is to read the biggest book on your shelf. Well, I didn't read the biggest book on my shelf, but I did read a big book, and this was for book club. I listened to it on audio. It is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. This particular copy is not much to look at, but I may insert a picture where you can get a better idea of what the actual cover looks like. This was for book club, and that was the reason I bought this earlier in the year, because I knew that I was going to need it for book club coming up. So it hasn't been on my shelf a long time, but it is a big book. I think it's around 500 or so pages. Maybe it's close to 500 pages. So we're just going to have to go with that one. I had thought about maybe reading The Stand by Stephen King, but I didn't have time. In October, I had too many other things going on, and that would have been when I read it. So maybe for next October, I will read The Stand. The fifth prompt is to read a book from your shelf that is set in another country. And I don't think I got this read in September, but I think I did listen to it in October, maybe November. I don't know. I got this one done, and the third book from the series. This is The Rescue, book 2 in the English Garden series by Lori Wick. I also listened to the third one, and this whole series is set in various manor houses and homes in England. And then the last prompt was to read a book from your favorite genre. So I have several genres that I love, but I went ahead and decided to choose a book that was Christian fiction. And I actually finished this trilogy because they showed up on Hoopla on audio, and I was so excited. I had read the first book in print a few months ago. I did a buddy read with my sister, and then this is book 2, Refining Emma by Delia Parr, and I also listened to book 3. And so this is lovely, wonderful Christian fiction, just complete comfort reads, and they are set in early 1800s New York on the Erie Canal, and they were both very enjoyable. So this is book 2, and I did finish book 3 as well. So that is what I read, and I'm still reading for the Get Your Shelf Together Readathon. I did read quite a few books from my shelf this fall, and I haven't counted those up yet, but before I upload this video, I will add up all the books that I read that were my own books, and we'll put that down in the description box below. So even though I didn't finish all of these exact prompts, I'm still happy about all of the books that I have read from my own shelves. Okay, so moving on to October. I participated in 2 different readathons for the whole month of October. One of them was the Mande-athon, and this was the second year for that readathon. Mandy's channel name used to be Mandy Garrett, but she has changed it recently to the Night Owl. And for her prompts, each letter of her name stands for a different prompt. So for the letter M, the prompt this year was murderous. And for murderous, I am going to count a book that I also counted for Get Your Shelf Together, because I did not get it read until October, and that is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. This book was very murderous. In fact, I am counting it for several readathons this fall, and it was interesting. I didn't love it, but it was definitely creepy and a little bit thrillery, and it can definitely count for murderous because there were several murders that took place at this abbey where the book takes place. Then prompt number 2 was the letter A, Apollicious, and for that one I'm also going to count a book that I showed you already, and this was the book that I intended to read for that challenge, and this is Orchard Valley Grooms by Debbie Macumber with these beautiful apples on the cover. So the third prompt is the third letter in her name, which is N, and that stands for nocturnal. And she said for nocturnal, you could read a fantasy book. So I am going to count The Black Cauldron by Lloyd Alexander. Now the fourth letter is D, which stands for dungeon. And originally I said that I was going to read a book that took place in Scotland, because I thought, you know, Scotland is full of castles, perhaps some of them have dungeons, and the book I had chosen was on Audible Escape. I believe it was called To Scotland with Love, book 1 in the Quilts and Kilts series, which is a romance series by Patience Griffin. However, after listening to that, it had absolutely nothing to do with dungeons or castles or anything, and so I decided I just absolutely could not count that for that challenge. But for several months I was reading or rereading The Hobbit, and I did finish this in the month of October. It of course is by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this is the annotated Hobbit, which is annotated by Douglas A. Anderson. So because I read at least half of this, I believe, during the month of October, and there's definitely some dungeons and caves and captivity and things like that going on in The Hobbit, I'm going to count this for the prompt dungeon. And then the last one is E, because she spells her name M-A-N-D-E, and that prompt is enchant. So I'm going to insert a picture here. What I wanted to count for that was a book that I found on Audible Escape, and it was the third book in I guess just a 3-book series. I wouldn't really count it as a trilogy because each is about different characters, but they are magical, and that's kind of really, you could read them in any order. But the book is called Magic Wand Ranch by Caroline Mickelson. This author also has a Christmas series, which I have listened to several of, and I think most of those are on Hoopla now on audio. Now that Audible Escape has gone away, if you have access to Hoopla, there are some Caroline Mickelson books on there, and those are very fun. So anyway, that is what I read for the Mande-athon. So the other readathon that I participated in is actually one that I created and co-hosted, and that is the hashtag Audible Escape to the End. Because we found out right at the end of September that Audible Escape was going away at the beginning of November. So I knew that I had a lot of things that I wanted to read on Audible Escape or listen to on Audible Escape. And so I kind of just came up with a checklist of things that I wanted to be sure I covered while I was listening to Audible Escape. So I'm going back now to look at my video so that I can look in the description and just share with you those prompts, if you will. I didn't really call them prompts. For me, they were just more things to be sure that I covered whenever I was, you know, going through my wish list and making sure that I got everything covered. So the things on the checklist, number 1 was challenge. You know, do you have any challenges you're working on for any other readathons or whatever that you could find on Audible Escape? And I've already mentioned one that I used for the Mande-athon. Then number 2 is category. If you're working towards the Audible Escape category challenge, did you complete it? And I did. I had 2 left to go at the beginning of October, and I got those done, Scottish and rom-com. And I will put in the description the 2 books that I listened to for those categories. And then number 3 is series. Are there any series on Audible Escape that you want to finish? The one that comes to mind that I finished that I really wanted to get to is the Hunt Family series by Brooke St. James. That was really good. I thoroughly loved that series. And I ended up starting and finishing another series by her as well. And then the next one is author. Are there any authors you want to read more by? And the one that comes to mind especially was Teresa Ives Lilly. She had a lot of shorter audiobooks, mostly all faith-based, and I had already listened to a few of those in previous months and years, and I wanted to get to as many of those by her as I could. And I think I got to everything that she had on Audible Escape except maybe 2. So that was really good, and I enjoyed those a lot. Then the next one was wish list. So what I suggested is go through your Audible wish list and see what's on your wish list that's on Audible Escape, and then cross-check that with Hoopla or Scribd or whatever. And that's what I did, and I was able to eliminate quite a few there because I had, I think I started out with about 90 something books on my Audible wish list. And so I was able to take quite a few off because I found them on Hoopla Audio and Scribd Audio and things like that. So that was just a suggestion. Check your wish list and make sure you got everything read off your wish list that you wanted to. Number 6 was recommendations. Was there anything on Audible Escape that had been recommended to you by someone else and you want to be sure you get to it before it goes away? There was one book that I definitely wanted to get to that I had heard Sarah recommend before, and it looked really cute, and I didn't end up listening to it on Audible Escape because I discovered that it was also on Hoopla. So I still definitely will listen to it at some point, but I didn't have to end up keeping it on my wish list for Audible Escape. The next one was TBR. Is there anything on your TBR that is on Audible Escape that you can get to before Audible Escape goes away? So there were several. Thankfully, I found some from my shelf that I didn't even know were available on audio, but I also discovered that they were on Hoopla when I cross-checked. So again, it was a crazy month of combing through my lists and combing through my shelves and just making sure that I maximized my time and got the things done and listened to on Audible Escape that I couldn't get somewhere else. And that was a lot of fun. And the last one was Try. That was suggested by Izzy, who was one of the co-hosts. Her channel is Happy For Now, and she suggested that we just put Try on there because that's definitely something that when you have an opportunity to try some different books, maybe out of your comfort zone or out of genres that you don't normally listen to, or different types of books, or try different authors or whatever, then that's always a bonus thing to do. So we added that to the list, and that is what we did for the Audible Escape to the End Readathon. It was a lot of fun. It was frenzied. I can't even remember now how many Audible Escape books I ended up listening to. Some were as short as, I think the shortest one was 35 minutes, and the longest one, I don't remember what was the longest one, maybe 13 hours. And all total, I think I read for October 75 books, and the majority of those were audio, and the majority of the audio were on Audible Escape. But I'm glad that I got them done, and I'm really happy about my reading progress for the month of October. All right, moving on to November. For Nonfiction November, I listened to several books, but I'm just going to show you the books that met each of the 4 prompts. One of the prompts was Buzz, and I consider 2 of these books buzzworthy. For book club, I listened to Educated by Tara Westover, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then I also listened to Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, and I did not enjoy this one quite so much, but it was still very interesting, and it has been talked about a lot, so it was good to just read it and get on the same page with all of the other people who have read it, and I'm glad that I did. For the prompt discovery, I went literal and picked a book off my shelf that has the root word discovery in the subtitle. The book is If the Church Were Christian by Philip Gulley. The subtitle is Rediscovering the Values of Jesus. And this has been on my shelf a while because I have been reading the Harmony series, which is a fiction series by Philip Gulley. He is a Quaker minister, and he has several books that are nonfiction, and I had not read any of them yet. I didn't love this one. His views on theology and Jesus don't line up exactly with what I believe, but it's still very interesting to read about how other people believe, so I'm glad that I read it. I actually listened to this one on Hoopla on audio, and I'm glad that I did. And then I did make one change for my original TBR. I had planned to read The 1 Minute Manager Gets Fit for the time prompt. And I had a different book that I was going to read for movement that actually was about aerobic exercises that you could do in your pool. But I ended up moving this one to movement because this one is about getting fit, and that includes movement. And because it also has to do with time, but it's not the first book of this nature in this 1 Minute Manager series, I picked up another 1 Minute Manager book to count for my time prompt. This is not the original one, but this is kind of an updated version, and this is was available on Hoopla on audio. So I listened to this on audio, and I checked out this from the library, the new 1 Minute Manager. Both of these are by Kenneth Blanchard with some different people who are his co-writers. So these were okay, not completely applicable to me since I'm not a corporate manager, but still I was able to glean some good advice from both of these, especially this one. This did have some good advice about getting fit and improving your overall health and things like that. So I'm glad that I read these, and though they met the prompts that I needed to read for Nonfiction November. So the last readathon that I want to talk about is the Fall Into Reading Challenge. This was created by Tia from Tia and All the Books, and it was co-hosted by Rainey from Rainy Day Reads, Angie from Literary Labors, and Cozy Reader Kelly. And I really enjoyed this readathon. It was such a cute prompt card. There were 2 different cards, and I of course had to go for the biggest one if you want to just see the card. It was super cute with all the little fall things on it. And so let me just go through quickly what I read for each of the prompts. Going across from left to right, top to bottom, it started with YA. So I read or listened to Solitary Blue by Cynthia Voigt, which is book 3 in the Tillerman cycle. Now, if you have heard me talk about Dicey's Song, this is a Newbery winner. It's book 2 in the series. The first book is The Homecoming, and then the third book is Solitary Blue. Now, I originally thought that Solitary Blue was going to be about the Tillerman's father, but it turns out it's about a boy who is about the same age as Dicey, and I think maybe there's a future for them going forward. We shall see. That didn't come into play yet because they're still pretty young, but anyway, it was a very good book. I did enjoy it, and I believe you would consider it a YA book and not a middle grade book. Then the next prompt, going across the board, was to read a book that is orange, yellow, or gold on the cover. And I am going to count Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Winspear. I listened to this on audio on Hoopla. I had drawn it out of my fiction TBR jar, and I was happy that I got that read. Then the next one is to read a book by a beloved author. Well, I've actually read several this fall by beloved authors, but the one I'm going to count is Ann B. Ross, who writes the Miss Julia series. I was up to this book, Etta Mae's Worst Bad Luck Day, and it was super cute. I really enjoyed it. And then the next prompt is to read a fantasy, and I'm going to count The Black Cauldron by Lloyd Alexander. And then the next prompt going across was to read a mystery. I read several mysteries, but I'm going to count this bind up of the first 3 Mrs. Jeffries books by Emily Brightwell. This is Mrs. Jeffries Learns the Trade, which includes 3 different books: The Inspector and Mrs. Jeffries Dust for Clues, and The Ghost and Mrs. Jeffries. I listened to all 3 of these on Hoopla, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. The top right corner is Author of Color, and I listened to 3 books by Melissa de la Cruz from the Descendant series. So I own book 3, Rise of the Isle of the Lost, and I'm going to count this one. Then starting on the second row, graphic novel. Now this one was my nemesis because I kept putting it off and putting it off, and it was the last day of November, and I thought, okay, I'm going to pick this up and read it, but then I was not quite done with one of my Nonfiction November books, so basically, I did not get this read in the time frame of the 3-month period. I'm reading it right now. I'm halfway done with it, and I'm going to finish it within the next day or 2, but I didn't get it done. I didn't even get it started, really, but I got them all done but one. So anyway, I will get this done very soon, and so I'm still going to count it as a win. I'm going to count it, this whole thing, complete, but I just didn't get this one quite done within the time frame, and there was no other graphic novels on my TBR that I was even remotely interested in reading right now. So it was that one or nothing. So the next prompt is Supernatural, and I read the last 2 books in the Left Behind series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry B. Jenkins. So for this prompt, I'm going to count Glorious Appearing. And then the next prompt is historical fiction. So I'm going to count 2 books by Lori Copeland and Virginia Smith. This is a duology called Seattle Brides, and these books take place in and during the founding of Seattle, and they are Christian romance. This is book 2, which is the only one I own. The first one is called A Bride for Noah. This one is Rainy Day Dreams. These were not my favorite Lori Copeland books, but still very enjoyable and definitely can count for historical fiction. The next prompt is to read a book that takes place in the fall. Now, I am going to count Miss Julia Lays Down the Law by Ann B. Ross, and even though when you look at the thumbnail cover for this book on Hoopla, it really looks like a Christmas book, and there are some little Christmassy things here, but this really takes place in the fall. There is some Christmas preparation going on, but it definitely takes place in November, so I think this is definitely a book that I can count for this prompt. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was so good. I'm really excited to get back into Miss Julia's world by listening to 2 of these books this fall, and I'm really looking forward to catching up with the series, hopefully this spring, so that I can be ready to read the newest one when it comes out, usually in April. The next prompt is nonfiction. Of course, with Nonfiction November happening in November, I read several nonfiction books, but I guess I will count Educated by Tara Westover, since it was my favorite nonfiction that I read during this fall. So the last prompt in that line is to read a book published before 2020. The book I originally wrote down is one I don't even have a copy of, so I just went and grabbed one of the others, one of the many that I read this fall that were published before 2020. This one was published in 2005. It is A Change of Heart by Philip Gulley. This was super fun and just hilarious, so I will count that for that prompt. And then starting on the third line, science fiction. Now I've got a couple here that you could probably count as science fiction, and I'm not really sure which one would be the most science fiction-y. I have here The Dead and the Gone, which is about an asteroid hitting the moon, knocking the moon out of orbit, but then what happens from there is just kind of post-apocalyptic, so I don't know if you would count that. This one is definitely futuristic, and there's a lot more science fiction-y things that happen here, gadgetry and things like that, so I could probably count the Ugly series. I did finish this series. This is book 2, Pretties, and then we have Specials and then Extras. So between the 3 of them, you could count any of those really for science fiction. They ride hoverboards, and they have different things implanted that, you know, are it is very science fiction-y. So yeah, that being said, I'll count Pretties, Uglies, and Specials for that prompt. Okay, then the next one is Standalone. Well, I read a lot of series books, so I had to go to one of my middle grade books for Standalone because I've really been working hard to make progress in series, and I really have not read a lot of standalones. So I'm going to count Deep Water by Watt Key. This is one of the Sunshine State books for this school year. Really, really good. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And then the next one is to read a book with diverse characters. This was so fun. This is by Lisa Patton. It's the first book in a trilogy. I think it's called the Dixie Trilogy. This one is Whistling Dixie in a Nor'easter, and they were just a really good group of diverse characters. This is about a couple who go to Vermont from Tennessee to open an inn, and they have a French chef, and then the original owners of the hotel, I think, are Scandinavian, and then there is at least one African American character, and so there's just a lot. It's a good, diverse group of characters, and just a very enjoyable book. So I really liked that one. And then the next one is published in 2020. So I have a few of those as well. The one I'm going to count is The Christmas Table by Donna Van Leer. This has probably been my favorite new release of this year. And it's part of the Christmas Hope series, but you could read it as a standalone. And I highly recommend that you read it. It's so good. And then the next one is a classic. So for book club, for my mystery book club, we read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I had read this before, and so I'm going to count this one as a classic. It's more of a modern classic, but still I'm going to count that one. And then contemporary. So I read a lot of contemporary books, but I think I will count a contemporary romance that I read. It's actually a romantic suspense. So it's several things. This is Rescue Operation by Lenora Worth. It's one of the books in the Military Canine Unit series, and I have really been enjoying that series. And then the last line, we have leaves on the cover. Now, I have a few books with leaves on the cover, but I didn't really have anything with fall leaves on the cover. But I am going to go ahead and count this one. This is book 2 in the Dixie Trilogy by Lisa Patton, because we have peaches and some leaves here. This is Yankee Doodle Dixie, also a very enjoyable book. I highly recommend the series. I am going to be hopefully getting to the 3rd book in that trilogy fairly early in 2021, and then I'll do a series review. There's also at least one of her books that are on Hoopla on audio, and actually these first 2 are on Audible Plus. So if you are in a trial membership of Audible Plus, you might check these out. And I loved them. I thought they were great. They do have a few negative reviews for one reason or another, but for me personally, I thought they were wonderful. And then we're getting close to the end. We do have a thriller or horror. Now, I don't read a lot of thriller or horror books. This one is kind of thrillery. I've already used it, and I'm trying to do a different book for each one. These are kind of horrific. In fact, why don't I just count the I read this one and listened to the 3rd book in the series. I have it here somewhere. So I don't know what to count for this one because I don't really read a lot of horror. This book 3 in the Last Survivor series was horrific, if you want to describe it like that. But I think probably the most thrillery book that I read is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. So we could probably just count that one and let it be done. I did listen to a couple of J.A. Jance books that would probably be more in the suspense category. So I don't know. Let's just use The Name of the Rose and call that done. Well, I was almost done editing this video when I realized I had not shown a book for the romance prompt. Of course, I did show some other romance books that I counted for other prompts, but I wanted to try to show at least a different book for each of the prompts on the Fall Into Reading Challenge, even though it was perfectly fine to double up. So for the romance prompt, I am counting Orchard Valley Brides. Earlier in this video, I showed you Orchard Valley Grooms, and this bind up has the 3rd and 4th book in the Orchard Valley series. The 3rd book is called Nora, and the 4th book is called Lone Star Lovin'. So I'm counting this book for the romance prompt. Then the next one is middle grade. I listened and read several middle grade books. Some I've already shown you, but I think for this prompt I will count one of the series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. This is The Grim Grotto. It's book 11. I have now in the month of December finished that series, but this was book 11, which I listened to in the month of October. And then a couple more. We have sequel. I listened to and read a lot of sequels. So for sequel, why don't I count this most recent installment in the J.P. Beaumont series that is written by J.A. Jance. Now I'm caught up with this series and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. This is Sins of the Father. Then the last one is a new to you author. Well, I've had several from this series by Chris Colfer sitting on my shelf for quite a while, and I'm super glad that now I have read the first one, The Wishing Spell. It's the first book in the Land of Stories series, and it was a fun mashup of lots of fairy tale characters, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So that is everything for the fall readathons. The Fall Into Reading Challenge, the Mande-athon, the hashtag Audible Escape to the End challenge, the Get Your Shelf Together, and even a little mention of the Summer Fling, which was actually in August. So that is everything that oh, and Nonfiction November. So that's everything I counted for the fall readathons. As of right now, I'm not planning to participate in any December readathons, simply because I need to focus on just finishing what I need to read for the rest of this year, and that is basically stuff for my own personal 20 by 20 challenge. So that's it for my readathon wrap up for the fall. Let me know what your favorite books were that you read for the fall readathons. Were there some readathons that you did in the fall that you really enjoyed that I didn't do, that I didn't mention, that maybe you recommend that I do next year? Let me know. So that's all for this video. I hope you're having a great day. Read a good book, and God bless you.